AI is definitely there. We try to use it a lot in our models. And also, this is a growing field. So there is also, this is called like causality, right? We should see those relationships. And there are some works to improve these type of models where you can also see the relationships. Let's say its current form, it's really, really useful to make predictions. So should we see them more in policymaking or in the real estate industry? 100%.
Welcome to another episode of Sink or Swim, brought to you by RentSync. From operational challenges to marketing mastery, we uncover the strategies and technologies in all things prop tech. So let's dive in as we explore the trends, tactics, and insights that define the future of multifamily investments. Sink or Swim starts now.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Giacomo Ladas, and I'm really pleased to welcome Erkan Yönder, an associate professor at Concordia's John Molson School of Business, whose recent study has caught the attention of pretty much everyone in our industry based on their prediction of where asking rents could reach. And again, we'll talk about it in full, but in short, the study used machine learning, which found that asking rents in Canada's largest cities, such as Toronto and Vancouver, could go as high as $5,600 a month in Toronto by the year 2032, and in Vancouver, over $7,700 a month. So Erkan, thank you for joining me today. We're going to go into this a little bit in more detail, but we're looking forward to discussion today. Your articles and seeing you all over the place has been really interesting, and it's a perfect fit for what we do here. So it's great to meet you and have this conversation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So I think let's start from the beginning then. For our listeners, what kind of was your inspiration for this research, and how did it come to exist?
I mean, that's a great question, and that's something really I want to discuss. And we missed out discussing this in the previous interviews a little bit. So, I'm joining or attending different industry events across Canada, like in Toronto, Montreal, or in some other places. I come across with some industry people, and, in the end, we are academics. So we do lots of research on the real estate market. So that's my specialization. I mainly work on real estate finance. And in some of those events, we came across with some people from Equiton, especially Aaron Pittman. I mean, I thank him for this work as well. So we came up together, and then we discussed, what we can do together, because we do some academic stuff, and that's really relevant to the industry. And then there are some questions that the industry is really interested in. And we sat down together. We developed a partnership in Equiton and Concordia University. And we started to discuss, what to do. And of course, Equiton is also a real estate company in the field. We said, okay, let's focus on the Canadian rental market because, it's really interesting for everyone. There are many unknowns going on. And of course, we wanted to look at it from a investor perspective and real estate company perspective, but also it attracted so much attention, with respect to affordability problem or the immigration policy and such. So the idea really came up by partnering, developing an academic industry partnership. And with that's we came up with this idea.
No, that's great. And maybe before we kind of get into the findings, could we maybe have a little level playing field of start by explaining what is the current state of Canada's rental market and how does it compare with other G7 nations and, maybe particularly in terms of supply and demand, where do we sit? And then we can kind of get into what did you see with your research?
I have two answers for this question. One answer is we had this preparation talk, and when I saw your question, okay, I didn't check the statistics for G7. So I checked before getting to our meeting. But I also have a personal experience, personal answer to that question. I had my PhD in Netherlands, and time to time I come up with my supervisor and for a very long period, co-author, Pete Eichholz. And this summer we came across, and every time we come together, we ask ourselves, okay, what is the next big thing to research in real estate? So we have that discussion almost every year regularly. And I asked this time, and he said, affordability. So affordability is a problem, for Canada. It's a problem for the US, for many European developed countries. I mean, I'm from Turkey. It's a very big problem in Turkey. So it's everywhere. So it's a really challenging question. And he said to me, what he doesn't understand is, or we don't understand is, there is this affordability problem and there's an easy answer. Why don't we build more? So it's kind of a puzzle going on there. So it's not unique to Canada. So it's kind of everywhere. But maybe Canada's case is a little bit different from other G7 countries. For instance, when I was thinking about this question, Like, for instance, there's a report by Scotiabank thing released in 2021. And if you look at the existing housing stock per person, Canada has the lowest number across G7 countries. Overall, as I said, this is a global problem, but Canada has also a very strong immigration policy. I mean, we can discuss this. Maybe it's contributing to the supply issue or like supply demand mismatch. But it again, like, I wouldn't say this is unique to Canada, but maybe it's a little bit bigger problem for Canada than other G7 countries.
No, it definitely is. And we're seeing it all the time with, the recent slowdown in international students coming in order to maybe soften demand a little bit. It's the number one thing that's happening right now is how do we get more supply into the market? Or maybe if we're not going to bring enough supply, we just lower demand. And that seems to be the balance happening right now. So you've probably spoken about this much, but let's get into your findings then. What exactly did you find? I gave a little bit of a lean in the introduction, but what were your findings and what part of it was kind of surprising to you?
Okay, I want to start that I'm very happy that this is a podcast. Sometimes I make long interviews and then some part of it is being released.
No, this is the long journey here.
I want to be very honest. So first things first, I mean, our intention was not really to scare anyone or, to give scare numbers. To be honest, I mean, I'm a researcher in India and I'm a professor at the university, and India, like, predicting the future is not an easy task. Let's start with that. So it's really, every month, many analysts make predictions on stock prices, on the economy, and then like they update all the time. So first of all, this is like, and also this is a very long-term forecast. In the report, we did like a 10-year forecast. But the idea is this year. So it's not, I never really spoke about the exact dollar values because it's really not my personal intention. But in the end, to make it better understandable, we release those numbers. But the aim is this year is really, we want to look at the historical data. We are focusing on census subdivision. So we have more than 300 different locations across Canada that we collected data. And we have different census data sets. We collected data from CMHC on completions, on different factors. So we have plenty of data. And what the machine learning model does, or what we do in this project, is like you input those variables, different observations, and the model kind of detects the pattern. So I think that's the best way to read our study. So the model detects the pattern, and there are government projections. So what we wanted to do is like our model determines each factor affects the rents, and we kind of use the government projections for the future and plug those future projections into our model. And that gives us the future rents. So that's more or less what we wanted to do. So to read the results in simple terms, there's a pattern going on in Canada, especially with respect to immigration and with respect to different demographic factors. And these patterns indicate that if we continue to do things in the same way, we are heading to really high rental values. Maybe then the affordability problem kicks in, right? Then it becomes very unaffordable. So I think the focus should be really the pattern, the trends in the data. And then the question becomes, okay, how can we change this trend in the data or the structure that we developed in the housing market? How can we change this? I think that's the critical question that we wanted to address.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's a really good point. Like, we're not trying to scare anybody with these numbers, but you can understand why someone might take it that way because, if you think someone wants to move to Vancouver in the next 5 to 10 years, who's paying the $7,500 a month to live there, right? So would you call it more of like, maybe not a wake-up call or a warning, but maybe something like that? Maybe this should be used as, look, if it might not be as high as you predict, or it might be higher, who knows what, but if we continue this trend, the effects of it are going to be, they're not small effects, right? It's something needs to be done before we get to a point where we can't go back.
Exactly. That's what we want to do, Giacomo. It's really our intention. It's not, so these numbers might not like happen and maybe not, I don't know. But in the end, and by the way, this can happen. Let's also discuss this a little bit, right? I mean, if you look at different markets in the US, like New York, if you look at Hong Kong, I mean, also, if you look at the numbers in Canada, I was discussing with my wife yesterday. So when we first came to Montreal, we rented a unit for $2,000, was 2018. And now we are talking about $4,000 for that unit. I mean, it's already happening in some way, right? So we see it in the markets. So this can happen. So it's not, I cannot say it won't happen. So this can happen. But then the question becomes, how can we change this? I mean, what should we do? And also, our project is not related to, or we don't want to discuss the immigration policy. So it's not about discussing the benefits or the costs of immigration, but it's really about numbers. So this is like immigration, other factors create the demand, and then we have some supply numbers, and we use those supply numbers. And if you combine them in a model, and then if you do some projections with machine learning, this is the outcome. So in the end, like this is a possibility.
Yeah, I believe the report said that by 2027, and Montreal rents could be somewhere like $3,300 a month, and then 2032 we were surpassing that $4,000 a month rent. And it's interesting when we talk specifically about Canada too, because I do a lot of these media hits because we post our rent reports of just what asking rents are currently. And I talk to people from Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, and the thing that I always make note is like these are international destinations now. You mentioned like what's happening in New York. Well, Vancouver and Toronto, Montreal, even specifically, like this is where people want to live. So I'm assuming then with these predictions that there's always going to be natural inflow of people who want to live in these cities. But then when you add all these external factors, just you're saying supply can't keep up. That's where the issue I think comes in.
I can add to what you say from academic literature. I mean, we didn't cite that in our project. So this is another thing. We might maybe update the project based on the interest that we got. So we are kind of collecting feedback, thinking about how we can improve the model, use the data in a better way. But at the same time, government updates the projections. So we are thinking about how we can implement them. But there's one paper that I really like in the academic literature. So it's a top 3 finance publication. So in that paper, the authors look into the London market. And the way they structure the project is they're looking at house prices. And the way they structure is for instance, there's, let's say, I can give you an example from Turkey. So let's say there's some political instability in Turkey. So which means that Turkish people would like to leave Turkey and maybe to go to one of the G7 countries. So for a better living standards and so. In that paper, they are looking at the Turkish neighborhoods in London. So if something bad happens in Turkey, the house prices in London, in the Turkish neighborhoods, they go up more than other regions. So this has a meaning. This means that immigrants come to these big cities like Toronto, like Vancouver and Montreal, and then they look at their peers, like maybe friends or relatives or other people like them, and they they prefer to live in those locations. So which means that, the immigration, most likely we will have the same pressure on the rents and house prices in Toronto, in Montreal, and in Vancouver. And that's why those regions came out really large in our model as well. So there's such a tendency. So immigrants prefer to come to those locations that are known for them, that they can find people like them. So there's that trend, and I think this is not an ignorable path for immigration.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned that too, because I believe you had a quote earlier where we were speaking about how maybe certain areas and certain cities of the country need different rules and regulations almost, where, Toronto's zoning area should be a little bit different than London or something like that, just because, a city isn't necessarily a city in this country, because so many of them are just a little bit more higher demand. So it's almost like we need some sort of specific zoning laws that are tailored to specific cities, because we have to account for this increase in population, increase in demand. It's interesting that you mentioned that before.
Yeah, and also, maybe we'll discuss more about the results. But one reason we wanted to look into granular data, like to compare different locations across Canada, is to see how the demand and rents are spread across Canada. So, and if you think about it, like we should ask this simple question: why people prefer to come to Toronto, for instance? So I gave one answer, right? There are more immigrants in these locations. Then the question becomes, why do we have more immigrants in Toronto than many other regions across Canada? The reason is there are available jobs. There are more available jobs. So business is much larger, let's say, in Toronto, in Montreal, and in Vancouver than other cities. So the question becomes, if like one result of our paper, and kind of that's the message we wanted to give, and I personally wanted to give, is like we need to create demand for different locations. So immigrants come in, everybody comes into Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Then the question becomes, how can we spread and make these people choose other locations to live in? The simple answer is we should create jobs in other regions as well. So we should create more jobs in other regions. so that people might consider like a different location than Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. And that's the point we try to make. And that's why we need local policies and government policies. We need to create some jobs, new businesses in different locations than these major cities.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point because sometimes I talk to maybe some smaller publications across the country who live in smaller cities. They ask this question that, they almost say tongue in cheek, but they go, Canada's such a big country, actual land size, right? It's the second biggest country. How do we have a shortage? And it's kind of it's not a silly question, but it's like, yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. You make that point great. It's like there should be enough to go around where we have jobs in a lot of areas where it's not just 3 or 4 major cities increasing that demand.
There were some attempts, right? I mean, we can talk about, for instance, Austin, Texas. Like California is the technology hub for the US. And we know that there has been some movement towards Austin, Texas, for instance, for high-tech companies. So again, like first the business moves into a new location, and then people start to move to those locations to get their job, those jobs in different locations. So it becomes really critical with respect to job creation as well. And I think that's really important to spread the demand. Otherwise, there's this evidence that I shared with you and that we are all aware of. People come to the same locations. So they prefer to work and live in the same locations as before.
That's exactly it, because your research does show that rent trends they vary widely depending on regions, right? Like I'm sure you saw some real standout differences you found between Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, but also these smaller regions. It seems like those big cities are the ones that get all the media attention as well. What's going to happen to ours? So no, like I'm sure your research indicated not only is it the bigger cities, but maybe there's opportunities to come as well from other regions, which I think is more of a positive thing to take away from this, not necessarily the doom and gloom of $7,700 a month Vancouver rents, right? There's enough variations between regions that it's more of a call for opportunity than just of straight up fear.
And also, if you look at the report closely, like we put some heat maps, and in the heat maps, you'll see that some places are really dark red, which means that rents are increasing a lot, and some locations are not. So then this means that pressure goes on certain locations and not every location. So then we need to find ways to spread the demand across from those highly hot regions to less hot regions. But we need to create some jobs and we need to create some policies to kind of direct the demand into different locations.
The one thing that I found really fascinating, and we're seeing this all the time when I talk just anecdotally from people, everyone seems to say that they see cranes everywhere, right? They see new builds happening just by driving around their neighborhoods, right? And you mentioned as well in your report that your findings indicated some sort of counterintuitive association between an increase in housing completions and rising rents, right? So you mentioned that, in other words, as supply increases, market rents are still going up, though you would think it wouldn't be the case with the supply and demand issues, right? That's kind of an interesting thing we see as well. And I'm not sure, I don't want to explain it for you, but that is definitely something that is kind of counterintuitive for people to think about, right?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, of course, right? If more units are available to people to rent and to live in, then of course rents or prices should go down. I mean, that's the logic. I mean, I really had a nice demand and supply figure. We first put it into the report and we removed it later on. Like we didn't want to make it too complex at the same time. It's an indicator. Let's take it very simpler. This is an unhealthy relationship. I think the easiest way to say that if you increase supply, if rents are going up, or if there's like in other words, if there's a positive correlation between supply and rents, this is an unhealthy relationship. I mean, we should think this way. And why is this an unhealthy relationship? Because we have really large excess demand. So like the demand increases, the increase in supply cannot catch up with the demand increases. So the only way to fix this, and we did kind of, we call it is like some convexity, nonlinearity in the model. But if I put it in simple words, we need to increase the supply so much that like small increases won't solve the problem. We need to increase supply really much that this will become a healthy relationship. Otherwise, we'll have this problem. I mean, of course, the other solution could be, and I think right now that's the government's response. You could also decrease the demand, right? So you can try to, but still there's excess demand. again, the question still becomes, maybe we can cut the speed, like decrease the speed in the demand increase, but there is still excess demand. So already in the market, we don't have enough units to cover the current demand in the market. So still, although we might cut the immigration numbers, we don't build more. Maybe it will be like maybe slow down the increase, but it won't fix the problem at all.
No, it's been so undersupplied for so long. I believe the CMHC, I think their estimate is over 2 million new units built, which is triple or quadruple Canada's housing building rate they've ever had, right? That seems to be like an impossible number to get to, but I think it indicates that we're not close, right? Building a couple hundred new units in the cities, we're not close, right? So I think that's where it shows the strain.
You made it perfect. It's really kind of the point I'm trying to make. So if we think that in the short term it's impossible, to increase the supply that much, then we should think and look at the policy or the market in a different way. That's why I bring in the idea that we should focus on different locations, maybe promote new locations that don't have the rental or housing pressure, like price pressures. Maybe that could help to solve the problem. Is an easy fix? No. Again, there's the tendency that people want to live in Toronto. I mean, it's not easy to change that issue.
Yeah, and it's kind of an unfortunate thing too about, we were just in Vancouver and we spent a lot of time in Toronto, but even geographically, it's hard because, Vancouver has limited space because, they have the mountains and the ocean, and Toronto is such an old city, right, that it's been building, hasn't really been able to catch up the infrastructure, that it's just simply harder just to build, right? We spent time in Calgary recently, that relatively newer city with tons of land to just expand, right? You can just see by visiting these cities where the constraints are, and the regional variations that you brought up, I think, are great. And that's kind of where I'm assuming you see some opportunities for government investments or policymakers to really move forward in the private and public sector to kind of get things going, because with the supply shortfall, sounds like you do see a lot of opportunity still.
Definitely. I mean, that's like, we don't focus on that. And to be honest, we didn't really go into details, but that's one side of the report, right? So if you use the data in a good way, of course, like the models can be improved. So our model can also be improved. But in the end, this kind of indicates also maybe some opportunistic investment strategies. I mean, at the same time, like we should think in both ways, right? Opportunistic as an investment, but at the same time, these type of investments could help fix the problem as well. So I think it could be beneficial for the society, but also for the investors at the same time.
Mm-hmm. The one part that I really want to know about it, because I have really no knowledge about it, is the actual AI side of things. So obviously these AI models was a really central component to your research. Could you maybe share a little bit in how AI enhanced the accuracy of your findings, but also helped you forecast these trends? I think that's because everyone wants to know what AI can do. Well, what can it do and how did it help?
Okay, there are two things. So we, like, as a professor in real estate, and I don't know, I have maybe 20 papers on different topics in real estate, lots of things on REITs and commercial real estate markets. Like we use linear models a lot. Like there are standard linear models. We are really experts on that. We know how to use and develop linear models. And what I mean by linear, let me try to make it a little bit simpler. Like just think proportional increase. Like if you increase, let's say, immigration by 1%, let's say rents are increasing by 2%. So if you increase by immigration by 2, rents are increasing by 4. So it's proportional. But machine learning model does this differently. So it's not proportional. So it's not linear, it's not proportional, it's complex. So if you push a model to be proportional or linear, then you limit yourself. But if you allow the model to be complex, and we don't know how it calculates. So because you plug in the data, the model does iterations, and after those iterations, it makes like a complex calculation that we don't know how. And in the end, it gives you the prediction. So that complexity kind of help you improve or help you make better predictions on whatever you do. So that's the major purpose of using machine learning model. The caveat is you don't see the relationships. So whatever I say, if I tell, and if you look at the report, like for instance, one of the findings is like working from home increases rents. That's a finding I can tell you from the linear model because it shows you the relationships. But in the machine learning model, it's complex. Actually, I got that question from someone by email. I said, I cannot tell you because I don't know what factor contributes to the problem in the machine learning model because so that's the trade-off. You kind of lose the economic logic, though you can choose your inputs based on economic logic, but in the end, you don't know the relationship, but it can give you a better prediction. So that's all purpose for using AI. And I can give you at least some evidence from the academic literature. I had another project for Global Risk Institute for Canadian pension funds, where we used a similar machine learning model to predict house prices in Quebec. And for instance, in that project, what we found is that the error in your prediction is like 30% less if you use an AI model than a typical linear model. So that's all the aim. And there are some academic papers. I think the error percent is the same. So there's always like maybe at least 20, 30% improvements in your prediction. So that's why we brought in the AI model, and that's why we did our projections using the AI model. Though it is not ChatGPT, by the way. I mean, to let you know.
Yeah, that's what most people think. AI. It's we're not using ChatGPT to do
I had
this,
that
right?
question also. That's why I wanted to mention. Yeah, but this is not ChatGPT.
So I can't recreate this myself by using GPT. So I'm assuming you see AI really in the future continuing to shape how we look at real estate research and policy planning. Do you think this is something we should be leaning into more? Do you see it as something that's here to stay?
Relationships are important, right? Because to develop a policy, I should understand what contributes, let's say in our case, to the rents. I need to know that relationship. So that's why, I try to do both in the project. So that's the advantage of the standard traditional models. But when it comes to projections and predictions, definitely AI kicks in and can help us a lot. Because in the end, we really want to see where things are heading, right? So in that respect, AI is definitely there. We try to use it a lot in our models. And also, this is a growing field. So there is also, this is called like causality, right? We should see those relationships. And there are some works to improve these type of models where you can also see the relationships. Let's say its current form, it's really, really useful to make predictions. So should we see them more in policymaking or in the real estate industry? 100%.
No, I think that's a great answer because it's here to stay. So why not use it as much as possible, right? And the more we use it, the more it kind of gets better. So,
and Giacomo, like I make that point a lot in my one-on-one conversations with some industry people also. Think like this. So there is, let's say, a real estate company investing in the markets. So they have their own observations. There are things that they can see with their eyes. They have their personal experience with the real estate business, which academics or researchers miss out. Like we sit on our data and try to understand data better. So I think this is the best way to understand. So there are things that industry people do pretty well, practitioners do well, and then there are things that you can really learn from the data that maybe you are not aware. So combining the two is the best option. And I think I would say the same thing for AI. So we have our own methodologies, traditional ways to do things, and AI can help us on certain aspects, especially when it comes to projections and predictions. So why not have that information on table and try to make more sophisticated decisions?
No, I think that's great. And then unfortunately you get the predictions and the projections and they're these numbers that 2032, right? These monstrous, scary numbers that I've shown some people around the office. I've shown some people just in my life who I know live in these cities. And, they kind of ask the same thing too. It's like, well, what happens if it gets to that? Like these projections, they almost seem unobtainable in a way that how can anyone afford to live in these cities, right? That's where I think, yes, these numbers.
Can I ask you a question? Let's change the roles a little bit. I can ask you a question. Just look at the median income pick up a different location in Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. Look at the median income and look at the house price. Do you think with that median income you can buy that house currently?
No.
There's not this connection already, right?
No. Yeah. So maybe renting is going to be becoming a little bit more like home ownership, where it's just income's here, rent's there.
That's possible, yeah. We have this connect already. That's what I mean. So if you look at the annual income for a typical household, and if you look at the house prices in that region, there are regions, if you check Toronto, there are regions that you see that the median income is around the family income is around $100,000, and where the house prices are $2-3 million. So how possible it could be, or how long would it take to buy a house with such an income in such a location? So there's already this disconnect, but it's going in the wrong direction for sure. I mean, it's not, I don't have an answer. I think you can think of this way. If at some point, if people really cannot pay these rents, then people stop coming to Toronto, or people will move somewhere else, right? They will leave Toronto. So until we see that, I think there is this trend.
And maybe kind of to close this off a little bit, do you have any advice to give to maybe landlords or renters who see something like this and, they want to navigate through these changing rental markets? Is the advice simply maybe look to secondary markets where more affordable rents, or is it, invest your money to buy a house? Like, do you have any advice based on what you've seen that maybe people should be doing?
Maybe not like an advice, but I always think about, and maybe I gave that answer partially also, but the way I see things is like, what options do we have? I think that's the way we should think. So if rents are going this high, if it becomes unaffordable, what options an individual has? I think we should really think about it. There are not many, right? One option is we need to pay higher income wages to these people so that they can start paying, which is not easy. Two, we can shrink the space. So, I can give you an example from the Netherlands, for instance. I mean, there are many houses, like single family houses in the Netherlands, and after 50, 100 years, they're divided into 5, 6 different units. So people, like, the space shrinks down, and then that's one thing people do. The second thing is, again, it's related to shrinking space. People can share space. So two people can come together and share an apartment. These are undesirable outcomes, but these are the options. The other option is you stop coming. You start moving somewhere else, and you go somewhere else. Maybe one option is remote work. So there's still the impact of remote work, which enables people to live in a suburb while working for a company in Toronto, downtown Toronto, for instance. That's another option. Other than that, there are not many options. I mean, in the end, this is how the market is being structured. So I think maybe the profile might change. So maybe it could impact composition of immigrants. So maybe wealthier immigrants start to come. So they already have the wealth to pay these rents, and they come to Toronto. Maybe their wages or income won't help to pay these rents enough, but maybe they already have the wealth to cover this. So no other options. This is like simple. Again, everything comes down to demand and supply relationship. Or the other option is we have to build more. And kind of that's what we try to make. And also, I really want to emphasize this. There is no government who could take such a burden on its own. I mean, we should really understand that we need property companies in the equation. We need to build more, and government cannot do it on its own. So we need property companies to build this. But then how can property companies build this without capital? Then we need capital injected into this market. Again, the capital from the government won't be enough to build this much. Then we need institutional investors to come to these markets and invest in those property companies, invest directly, invest in REITs, so that we inject enough capital into this market and so that we can build more. And then there's the role of the local governments. Zoning should enable to increase the supply. So we have zoning problems, we have regulation issues. So we should really think about those zoning restrictions at the same time. So there are many dimensions. As I said, we also need to think about the business side. In the end, people move to locations where there are jobs and businesses. So then we should really think about how we can reshape businesses across different geographies, across Canada. I think that's another solution.
I think that was really, really well said. And I think you touched on it good with, it is a business, right? And developers probably, they need to recoup money back, of course, right? So by making it more affordable for them, whether that's removing some sort of taxes for them, I know the federal government has removed HST for those who want to build purpose-built rentals, but interest rates are also going down, right? So it's really expensive to build, right? So for these developers to build these purpose-built rentals and condos and homes, it has to be more affordable for them to build too. It's not necessarily renters and people who want to buy homes are on one side and then developers are on the other and they're clashing. We all want this solution. We all want to be able to have something more affordable. And I think you said it great when you said it's not just going to be a one solution thing. It's got to be everything coming together.
And also, I mean, some people think that way. I mean, I even read a recent paper on this. we shouldn't blame the investors here, right? So we need the investors. So it's not, so investors might have a short-term impact on maybe with the rent increase or so, maybe it's a possible. But in the long run, it's a very simple solution. We need to build more. And in order to build more, we need capital, investors, real estate companies, and local governments and the government involved in this problem.
No, I think that's so well said. And Erkan, for the future, for our listeners, we'll link everything we can. But if anybody wants to read your research, learn a little bit more about you, what's the best way to do so and to find this?
I'm still a professor at Concordia, so I'm not moving anywhere. I'm in the finance department at John Molson School of Business. So if you just search my name, you'll reach out to my university profile, and you can easily reach out to me by email, for instance. Email is better. I don't like to talk that much, so email is better. You can reach out to me. First email, then we do podcast together.
Well, there you go. We'll make sure to link everything in the show notes for this. So again, we really appreciate this. This was a great piece. We've been sharing it all through our company, and it's really caught the eye of industry experts. So I do want to thank you for spending some time. I know you're quite the busy guy. So again, thank you so much for all the work you did. We really appreciate this.
No, it's same here. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sink or Swim, brought to you by RentSync. If you enjoyed today's show, make sure to visit www.rentsync.com/podcasts for detailed show notes, key takeaways, and more. Thanks for listening.